Well, this is Shop Talk, our weekly discussion of journalism issues. I'm Rich Egger.
I'm Will Buss.
And I'm Jessica Martin.
Student newspapers on 2 campuses are credited with being first to report significant stories in the past year. The Daily Northwestern at Northwestern University reported last month on hazing, sexual assault, and other problematic behavior involving the university's football team. Head coach Pat Fitzgerald was fired, and some players have filed lawsuits while others have transferred to different institutions. And the Stanford Daily at Stanford University reported last fall that the school president's research was under investigation for scientific misconduct. An independent review did clear Marc Tessier-Lavigne of research misconduct, but it also found serious flaws in 5 scientific papers for which he was the principal author, and he eventually resigned. And you both have worked with student reporters, and this is an example of the type of work that certainly students are also capable of doing.
Absolutely, Rich. And I think it's very impressive that the student media has taken the lead on these very important stories, the investigative stories that serious journalists do and should be doing day in and day out. But unfortunately, I think this is becoming maybe a little bit of the norm where if student journalists are going to have to take the lead on these things when more commercial newspapers downsize dramatically or worse, go out of business. And frankly, I think you can almost see that in that far beyond our own backyard in Macomb, where our local newspaper has dwindled because the resources have eroded by the newspaper owner. And I think perhaps we're going to have to rely more on other media and or maybe student journalists to do the same thing, unfortunately. But because there's this void that's happening, I commend these student journalists from these student journalism newspapers and programs that have stepped up and recognized that they need to do this very important work. And at least they're there to do that, where otherwise probably maybe we might not have these very important stories reported otherwise.
I totally agree. I've definitely, some of my favorite time was spent with student newspapers. I actually had to work primarily at private institutions, which, as some people may or may not know, the First Amendment and or the college level of the First Amendment is not as effective. It's sort of more of a guideline as enforceable, meaning where the student press is protected, right? So Western was my first time teaching at a state institution where the students were very protected, right, as reporters. And so that makes a big difference in what students can cover and how comfortable they feel covering. And those of us who've been advisors for student journalists, I'm kind of talking on the other side here, like, yes, they did great reporting, but how protected were they from the institution? So those of us who have worked as advisors for student journalists, it's very interesting. We would always joke, like, I don't know if this is going to put me in the president's office, right? And not saying that colleges or universities will come down on student reporters, but everyone is protective of their institution. I mean, it makes sense, right? That's why they have a marketing office. But student journalists and reporters should be reporting with, ethics and with integrity. And that means talking about the things people don't want to talk about. And they also are often very close to the population that's being possibly made vulnerable in this situation. So I'm thinking of like the hazing incident at the college. You would have to make sure you didn't have any reporters that were also athletes in that situation and were affected personally by that, things of that nature. So it becomes these incredible teachable moments, which is very cool. It's unfortunate that it happened, but it's a very cool thing for the students to be able to report on it. And report on something so close to home and do it with integrity is also difficult. So I'm kind of thinking of the other side here, like how amazing it is that they did it, but all of the nuance, like all of the hurdles they would have had in trying to report on something like that.
Very true. And of course, the students are close to the situation, certainly in terms of Northwestern, perhaps knowing some of their classmates who are on the football team, perhaps, and starting to learn about some of the things that are happening within the football team, especially with Northwestern being really within the Chicago media market. might be difficult for a Chicago large media organization to really know the intricacies of what might be happening within that team. But like I said, fellow students might be talking amongst themselves, and that's how the ball might have gotten rolling on this particular story. We've seen this in the past here at Western, where the students are the first to hear about something that is happening on campus, and then the word gets out and the stories start to come out.
No, absolutely, Rich. I agree. I think this is very important. And I don't think it's especially in, Evanston, the greater Chicago area example, especially, where I don't think it's a necessarily or at all an issue of a Chicago media dropping the ball, maybe just not knowing. And so student athletes or student journalists, rather, that were on campus had this access and caught whiff or drift of this and investigated this and followed up on this. These institutions are like communities within towns, and covering a college campus, there's always news to be reported, and that's why it's so important that we still continue to support and nurture and educate student journalists, because not only can they go out and cover their communities, but they have their own institutions here as well. A college campus has constantly a source of news and information that people need to know about, and it's a great training ground for students to take advantage of and to learn from their craft. And this was an issue of where this was a major news issue that came out of Northwestern, Division I football program, that these journalists who are, I think, well-trained, and they recognized news when they saw it, used their news judgment, and followed up and did a thorough job of reporting this.
That makes such a huge difference. Like you were saying, they know they're on the ground floor of what's going on. There's absolutely, even in a small, actually, like you said, in a smaller market, it might have been easier for the local news to have a better grasp of what's going on there. Like saying, if we did have a newspaper that was reporting locally in Macomb, they may have a better idea of what's happening on Western's campus versus Northwestern, which is in, like you said, the Chicago market, such a massive market. There's so much to cover. There's just almost no way. But then this is exactly why we teach journalism, right? To hold the powerful accountable. I mean, how better to do that than to have students keeping track and protecting their own fellow college students, right? Their own fellow athletes. So it really makes sense. And again, I just go back to when you have to teach these really tough stories and how to cover them, it's honestly the best way that students can learn. And it really gets them that, I would say, get bitten by the bug, right? You have to get bitten by the bug to learn to do this work. It doesn't pay super well. It's very hard. It's long hours. But that can really teach them that, oh my gosh, this work pays off. This protects people. This creates that knowledge and gives people that information that they wouldn't have had otherwise, that can really be beneficial and make a difference. And I think that that's kind of the best way to get students to get bitten by that bug.
Indeed. And with that, I think we're going to wrap up our discussion for this week. Our listeners can join us again next week here at tspr.org for more of Shop Talk.